Hi everybody, we've got a few more people joining. I'll just take my time with my quick intro. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name is Nisha and I'm the partner manager with Centify. Just a bit about our format today. So how it will run is we've got a 30-minute session with Carl Weller, the presenter, and we'll have 5 to 10 minutes at the end for any Q&A. You'll notice a Q&A button along the bottom of your Zoom screen, so please use that and fire through any questions along the way, and Carl might be able to answer some of those on the fly. Just a quick thanks to GitLab, who are one of Centify's technology partners. And I just wanted to thank them for their association and their interest in our web series, of which this episode is one. Before I hand over to Carl, our presenter, just a little bit about Carl. So really pleased to introduce him and have him present today. So Carl Weller, part of our Centify team, he's really highly regarded across our team and the industry in terms of his work and his ability to work with organisations to help them lift delivery and delivery effectiveness just to that next level, really. So let's get started. Over to you, Carl Weller.
Sorry, people, a bit of mouse tactics there in terms of starting video and audio and things, but looks like we're good to go. Thanks, Nisha, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us today. For the webinar, Outsourcing IT, where to next? And just to let you know why we've even landed on this topic, it's really about some of the things that we have seen in the market, and some conversations we've had with clients, some conversations we've had internally, sometimes about conversations we've had with clients. And what we're seeing is a bit of a shift away from predominantly outsourcing to people thinking more about whether or not they outsource or insource. And in some cases, people starting to follow a bit more of a deliberate insourcing strategy. In Wellington, we've seen that predominantly with the banks leading, but some larger government agencies as well. MSD is one that's really embarked on a big insourcing and internal capability drive recently. And one of I guess the big things we've seen dealing with customers is some of them have been following an outsourcing strategy for a while, and it has actually in New Zealand been pretty much the mandated strategy from central government is buy first, don't build, as a service, not bespoke. That was starting in 2010-11 when I was back in government. It's actually over time, it's almost hollowed some agencies out to the point where they're actually struggling to manage their vendors effectively because they've lost so much of that expertise in doing. And when that happens, you're starting to run a pretty high trust model with your vendors. So that really is why we thought we would talk about this particular topic, and doing a little bit of research around it. Deloitte started talking about insourcing again in 2010, and there's a really fantastic example from GM where they insourced 10,000 IT jobs starting in 2012, and have actually got really good results. So it's worth, in your own time, taking a bit of a look at this. But one thing I think would be really useful is just to understand where everyone's at in terms of their thoughts around insourcing and outsourcing. So I've got a little poll for you. Should be starting now. Look at that. Yep. We'll just give everyone a little bit of time. The percentage of people having voted is climbing reasonably quickly. It just hit 40%, so it shouldn't take too much longer, and then we can maybe look at the results and see what people are thinking. How are we doing? 72, 75, just about there. People, thanks for the patience. And 82. If we stop climbing, we might end the poll, as maybe everyone who's wanted to vote has. So we'll just give people just another couple of seconds to jam that button. No, that looks like we're at about where we're going to get, I would say. Yeah, we're getting people unvoting. Unless that's other people joining the webinar. That will do. Hopefully you can all see that on your screens now. And it is really interesting in that it's quite split. Some people are planning to outsource more, 33%. Another 29% are pretty happy with their level of outsourcing. And roughly, exactly the same number of people are happy with their level of outsourcing, but have concerns around specific vendors. And that's something that we've picked up in our conversations in the marketplace as well. And some, but not many, not quite 10%, actually planning to insource what some of those vendors are doing. So that's really interesting. It's good to get a bit of feedback from the market, and also to be able to share that with everyone else. Now, where we are now is a good place to start. And to be honest, I mean, I've been in the industry a little while. You can see the grey hair in my beard and here. These numbers haven't changed in 25 years, okay? Ever since we've been collecting metrics about how well projects are doing, these have been pretty much the numbers. Roughly a third are successful, a third fail, a third are challenged. Now the numbers up here are from KPMG New Zealand in 2017. That's the third of 3 polls they ran from 2011 to 2017. They're consistent though with numbers from the Standish Group starting in 1994. So, that's a long time ago now. Some people on this webinar may have been at school in 1994, or maybe even not at start of school yet. But those numbers have not budged. They haven't budged with updates to PMBOK, people starting to use Prince 2, people starting to outsource a lot, people starting to insource. These numbers are fairly intractable. And it's not a good place to be, right? When we're actually saying that only a third of the time we get what we want out of projects, and projects are still the dominant way that we deliver change in the IT space. So that's where we are. Now, in terms of today's discussion, we're going to talk about what I see as some of the key issues impacting people at the moment. I'm going to introduce a fairly basic framework for how we can look at different delivery approaches, specifically around insourcing, outsourcing, and getting more visibility. And then we're going to run through an example of what we consider a best of breed tool set that can help you create the right level of visibility and manage things, make the right decisions. And look, if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A session. And if we're doing reasonably well for time, hopefully Nisha will give me a shove in the ribs with her elbow or something, and I'll be able to answer them as we go. So in terms of key issues, I think one we're seeing a lot is simply increasing complexity. In most organizations we deal with, if they do things like an application audit, they'll find dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of applications. And many of them are best of breed as a service, supposed to reduce cost and complexity. But what we find actually is it's not so much about the app, it's about the data. And many of our clients have actually, whether they know it or not, they've become systems integrators for their vendors, unless they have taken that extra step and hired themselves a system integrator. Things just keep changing. As I say, I've been in the industry a long time, and I do a lot of research out of work, but I can't keep up. There is so much going on that you actually have to pick and choose the things you're going to focus on. And I think for someone whose job isn't consulting or giving advice or focusing on delivery and delivery effectiveness, how do you find the right answers? Because every vendor is probably going to give you their own flavor of what the right answer is. Who can you trust? Is there good practice guides out there? And the answer is actually there are. There's some really good stuff on the web from Google. If you look at, if you just Google the words Google DevOps, you'll come to a great site that has a lot of really foundational information. You can also look at Google's Project Aristotle in terms of, teams and people and culture. There's DORA, the DevOps Research Association. All of these, there's fantastic resources out there. But just going back to my earlier point, one of the problems, I guess, is the information's there, but really it's up to you to have the knowledge to interpret it, to decide if it makes sense in your context or not, and then be able to implement it. So remembering in some cases for some organizations, their technical capability is not as high as it used to be. Even though the information is out there, it doesn't necessarily mean you can do something with it. Another thing I see a lot of is, quite simply, not everyone has all the information. And often as a purchaser, the time when, if you like, your information ownership or visibility is the highest is actually right at that purchasing point, where you have very high visibility of your requirements and you're engaging with vendors. But very often, once you get past that hurdle, sign the contract and start delivery, your information visibility can plummet quite quickly. And what you're left with is abstracted or account managed or massaged information that very often is a subtle shade of green. If it's a multi-vendor engagement, it's possible actually that there really isn't anyone that understands the whole picture, unless you're explicitly paying someone as part of that multi-vendor agreement to be the, if you like, the solution integrator. And this is for me, one of the bigger issues is with software and with solutions, it's actually really hard to see the quality of the system from the surface, what you see on the surface, the UI, the reports you get in from your vendor. And the fact that often when we're delivering with projects, what we're doing is we're focusing, we want our project managers to be really driven and selfish and focused on meeting their specific goals and objectives and budgets. But what can happen is that projects and even governance groups can make decisions in the short term that really don't meet the longer term objectives of the organization. And how that plays out most of the time is you see a pattern of projects that add a little bit more technical debt and a few more bugs to the register. And every project does that. And over the years, all that accumulates. So what we're saying is you can't just focus on time, cost, and scope. You've really got to be across quality, but you need to be able to do that in a way that doesn't have you needing to crawl through code. So just for our second poll of the session, what we're wanting to understand is at the moment how you measure quality from your vendors or from your internal teams for that matter. Okay, people starting to vote. .75%. That might be about where we land by the looks of it. Give people a couple more seconds. That looks about where we're going to land, I think. Sharing the results now. And to be honest, I'm actually really positively surprised and happy when I see these numbers. I would not have thought that there would be as many people picking the third option. You know, almost half of our respondents are saying they're actually specifying detailed measures and they are tracking them during delivery, which is just fantastic. Unfortunately, though, the other half are all falling into, I guess, the second group, where either they're not tracking, they're not specifying and tracking quality at a particularly detailed level, and you can see the result of that is actually, you know, the first time you really find out about quality is once you get that visibility back at UAT time. So maybe if we can stop sharing that poll now. And one of the other things, the last issue, if you like, that I want to call out is often, and especially if people are still using more traditional models, but to be honest, even if they're not, even if they're using the latest and greatest agile models, very often something other than code that is at the very least functionally tested is being considered done or a measure of progress. I recently read something that said that, you know, good was if things are demoed. That's the measure of progress, which is a little bit far away from, you know, the manifestos. The only measure of progress is working software. What it comes down to, though, is it's not done until it's done in IT, and done is generally when it's been tested and it's functionally tested. That's integration testing, performance testing, etc., etc. Even, you know, I've worked with some clients with large, complex legacy systems, and if you simply ask the question, hey, how can we test this as early as we can? Even if we're talking once a month, we can put something into functional testing only. It's better than just saying we're dev complete, so we're doing great. Because a lot of the projects I worked on, and you know, early in my career, were doing great. That was the classic green, 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 red project, and often red was when you hit UAT. So moving into the second part of our presentation, this is a bit of a framework we've been kicking around and starting to use with some clients. And it's really just sort of boiling down what we think a good starting point is for delivery effectiveness. And the first thing really is, if we think about any change, be it a single code change or a whole project, it's going to go through a process roughly like this, you know, from we've got an idea all the way through to it's in use and we're monitoring it. And while it's going through that process, to have really good control, you need good visibility. So you want to be looking at workflow and understanding progress. You want to understand code quality and security compliance. You want to be able to manage testing, have metrics around that, and you're going to have production metrics as well. And what we typically see in an outsource model is that there's a point in that flow, if you like, where your visibility is not that good, and often rather than having the full visibility that you would have if everything was in your set of tools, you're given these red, amber, green reports, and you know, depending on where the point is where things come back into your world, your visibility increases again. And often what that means is that problems that are caused in the pink space get found later on in the blue space. And the further right you allow that pink space to go, and I mean, in some cases it goes right up to, you know, UAT, the more risk you're taking on, because the later you're going to get that visibility back and find out what's really happening. So how can you get out of that pattern? There's a couple of options really. The first one, and we're calling this the gold standard, is that you create your own software factory effectively, and you provide it to your vendors It's your tooling. You configure all the scans and all the linting and everything else, and they simply use your tools. And the good thing about that is everyone has all the information. You've gotten rid of that information asymmetry, and you can have good, fact-based, honest conversations about what's really going on in the delivery. Now, if people are interested in this model, especially if you're interested in, say, a secure, hardened software factory, look up, if you just Google US Air Force Platform 1, what you will find is they have created effectively a gold standard security hardened set of software factory artifacts, if you like, and they live in GitLab. You'll see if you're on there that obviously only people affiliated with the US military can use, but they've proved that it can be done, security at the highest level. But if that's a step too far for you and a step too soon, and for most people that really is, then what we're saying is start using standards and set them and talk about them with your vendors and measure them and monitor them and put some standards on yourself as well. Because often what I see, I've been brought in a few times now to, if you like, work alongside a purchasing organization and their vendor to just make sure that things are going to be okay. That's how I describe it, really. It's literally just making sure that, when the vendor says they can do agile, they can actually do agile. That there's no blockers on the purchaser side, those sorts of things. And for me, the big thing and the place where problems can very, very easily start is actually that the requirements that are provided to the vendor are not of great quality. They're not dev ready. And if that's the case, then don't be surprised, when your vendor starts to churn a little bit. So do yourselves a favor and actually look at your own requirement standards and your own definition of ready. And perhaps you make that part of the initial procurement discussion with your vendor is simply, hey, are these requirements good enough for you to start developing next week if we were to sign on the dotted line? And then set the coding and unit testing and scanning standards with your vendor. Get them to give you access to their tool if they're not going to use yours. So you still have all the information. You get rid of that pink box of lack of visibility. Really, I guess, though, what it comes down to is make an informed decision about where you're going to centralize again, where you're going to say, no, it comes back into our world. And it might be here, it might be here. One of the things we're seeing a bit, though, is that many clients don't want just a view of a single project. They're starting to use road mapping tools predominantly to get a view across portfolios, or programs, and start to plan at that level. And you can imagine if you've got a lot of stuff in multiple vendors' tool chains, the only way that you could do that organizational level portfolio management is effectively to duplicate the information in your set of tools, which is obviously it's extra effort and it's subject to errors being made. So looking at tools, we're going to look at a few things that you can do in GitLab. And GitLab is one of those tools that we consider best of breed. It offers you a lot of functionality in terms of workflow management, roadmap planning, very, very strong on CI/CD, code quality, standard scanning, et cetera, et cetera. So using GitLab, you can have this sort of view of, in this case, it's a sample project I found in our own GitLab instance. But you can create a roadmap that can be multi-layers deep, that can go across multiple projects, programs, portfolios. You can manage dependencies, and you can get a really good sense of progress. You can also click into any of these bars and get more information if you want. You can set up your own build pipelines with as many steps as you want, as many layers of scanning and quality checking and testing, and you can visually watch them run and you can get reports and results. And GitLab actually provide a really useful kind of visual way of setting up the pipeline so you can decide whether your different tests are going to be run in parallel or in series, etc., etc. You've got built-in security scanning. We've got DAST and SAST, we've got container scanning, we've got dependency scanning. All of this information is simply collected for you, and you can abstract it and get a good sense of how your delivery is going. Either at the project level or a higher level, you can also, this is what they call quality insights, you can see how many bugs your team are creating or finding, depending on your viewpoint. Each month, you can look at how they're dealing with different sorts of severity of bugs. And obviously this team is, you'd probably say they're not having a great last couple of months. Things are starting to climb up a bit in terms of the number of bugs. So that's the sorts of things you can get from a tool, and some of them are more project level concern, but there's always a way to abstract this sort of information up. And I think it's important, if we step back from projects, really what everyone should be doing is understanding their quality landscape. This is something I've been talking to clients about for the last couple of years, is if we step back from delivery and we look at all the systems that we look after and how well they're serving the business that we support and how easy they are to change, how responsive we can be to our customers because our systems are of good quality, what we often find is actually there's skeletons buried, to be honest, and this might look like an overly negative sort of picture with not much green, but it would be reasonably reflective of most of the clients I work with. There's always some level of compromise involved in IT delivery. That's the cold hard truth, if you like. And really having a view like this, where you're looking at, are our requirements for the system that we've built, are they actually the system we've built? Do we have up-to-date design documentation? Have we got tooling in place that tells us about the quality of our system and our monitoring? And more importantly, what are we doing when we see these amber and red, dark red dots? What are we doing to fix these over time? Like, what's our plan? We can't just keep adding to the tech debt register. And we also can't just allow things to carry on like this for 10 or 20 years and then replace the system. Although that's actually an approach I've seen lots of people use for quite some time. Key measures that you can use to tell you how you're doing, and I guess as well, worth talking to your vendors about to drive continuous improvement, even through the delivery of a project, are the DORA metrics. And the blue ones, change, fail, and time to restore. They're your classic sort of service management type metrics that most organizations have actually got a pretty good handle on. The ones in pink, though, the software development related metrics, lead time and deployment frequency, very few organizations I've worked with actually have any idea about what their average lead time to go from. In this case, in the DORA metrics, it's from someone committing code to it being deployed to production. Most people would have no idea what their lead time is. And same with deployment frequency. How often are you deploying to production? Now, the reality is we're not all Google, we're not all Netflix. We don't need 10,000 deploys a day necessarily, but every organization has a heartbeat or a cadence or a degree of responsiveness that is expected, and that's the lead time that you need to match. And so collecting this metrics, if you're not able to match it at the moment, it gives you a way of improving. Fortunately, GitLab, and it's a feature of GitLab Ultimate, actually has built-in DORA for metrics, which is, I think, one of the few tools that does this. It will actually collect lead time, DORA for lead time for you. You can see not a lot happens on the weekends, is what I'm guessing with this one. And it will also do deployment frequency. Do the other metrics as well, but those are the two I wanted to focus on because they're the harder ones usually for organizations to collect. And hey, you might not need to be doing 25 or 30 deploys a day. In fact, you might need to do a deploy a week to production. That may be your organization's cadence, and it may make people very, very happy. You know, that's actually what we want. So just wrapping up, I think I'm pretty much being on time, which is really good. What we really want to communicate, I guess, is that the basis for improving your delivery capability, whether this is in or outsourced, is actually having really high visibility of what's happening. And good standards and good use of tools are a really good way of getting there. And it can remove the huge information asymmetry that you can get, and it can actually increase trust and collaboration because everyone's put their cards on the table, right? And you've had the conversation up front about what the standards and expectations are. Not only that though, as the delivery progresses, you can actually get real-time results and you can have sensible grown-up conversations and you can say, well, what are we going to do? Do we go faster and lower our quality standard, or do we want to keep our quality standard really high and accept less scope? Or is it a little bit more nuanced in that other areas of the system where we drop the quality standard? But it's you consciously choosing the end result you're going to get based on actual information rather than what often happens, which is you get to a point late in the project where things start to bubble up and you really don't have too many choices anymore. And my little statement down the bottom really sums it up. It's really about having good controls in place so that you can stay in control. Now, obviously, if you'd like to have a chat with us, we are here to help. And I think there will be a follow-up email going out shortly. If I'm more than happy to jump on a call with people. And now we will open up to questions.
Not too many in here, but please feel free to pop a question down in the Q&A box. I'll read out the first one though, but again, please use that if you want to put anything through, and we'll use the last 5 minutes to go through those. So the first one we have here at the top is, how could we review where we're at or get started? How can we review where we're at or get started?
Well, I guess right at the start, there's kind of some basic questions, which are, how do you manage your work? Is all your work in a tool like GitLab or Jira or Azure DevOps? Can you see, because knowledge work is different to other sorts of work, you can't see it, which is why we use these funny little post-it notes or stickers on a on a wall. Is this the only way we can actually see what's happening? Can you see your work? Then I'd say, for a start, is all your code and source control? And to be honest, many organizations we work with, that's not necessarily the case. Often most of their code is in source control, or it's in several different source control systems. So that's kind of the two places to start. How can I see my work? How can I see my code? And then what you come down to is, right, great, now that I can see that, what are the things that are the biggest blocker for me at the moment? So when you start to see your work, what you might see is there's a particular individual or team where work just seems to kind of gather around, your classic bottleneck. In the code space, what you might see is if you get all your code and source control, and so you put it in GitLab and you start running some code quality metrics across it, pretty quickly you'll see where your biggest issues are as well. So that's what I'd say, in a couple of minutes about you can tell where you are and where you might start.
And there's just one other one here in the last couple of minutes that we've got. How do we measure if our outsource partner is any better than others? How do we measure if our outsource partner or partners, I guess that's meant to mean, is any better than others?
Well, classic consulting answer is it depends, but I'm guessing what you mean is how do we compare vendors that we have rather than, because, you know, vendors are extremely unlikely to publish DORA metrics anytime soon. So to let you do some comparison shopping. So really the question is, how do we compare the performance of the vendors that we have? And, you know, really, I think we've talked about that in this session, is either you get them in your tooling or you get access to their tooling, and you agree, and it's platform specific, but you agree roughly the same sorts of code quality and security quality standards, you know, and use the DORA metrics. There's 7 years now of empirical research around the DORA metrics to suggest that they are really high drivers of quality and great outcomes for clients and customers. But it all starts actually with having access to that source code, or having access to the tools that can tell you about that source code. I think that might be the end of the questions.
It is. That's it. So I think that's a wrap, guys. We both hope that you've found it worthwhile today, and you know, maybe it's prompted some thought for you, and that's what we hope for in a session like this. So thanks, Carl, for your time. Thanks on behalf of Centify and GitLab, and yeah, appreciate you joining us today. Thanks, and enjoy the what's left of the week. See you.